You think you know what power looks like: money, fame, control. But have you ever seen the kind that lives in a man's mind? The kind that doesn't build empires but burns them from the inside? Lord Byron's life wasn't just poetry. It was punishment. Behind his beautiful verses and seductive charm hid a man whose heart was as dangerous as his words. A man worshipped by women, envied by men, and feared by his own reflection. This is the story of how brilliance became a curse, how the same pen that wrote immortal love turned into a blade that cut through his sanity. Byron wasn't born into greatness. He was born into chaos, and his life would become a haunting reminder that some gifts are poisoned. London, 1788. The city was covered in fog, and inside a quiet house, a boy took his first breath. George Gordon Byron. The world would come to call him Lord Byron, but his blood carried scandal long before he could even walk. His father, known mockingly as Mad Jack Byron, had a taste for two things: women and ruin. He married Byron's mother only for her fortune, took her money, and left her nearly penniless. Then he vanished, leaving a trail of broken promises and unpaid debts. Byron's childhood was marked not by silver spoons, but by instability. His mother, Catherine, loved him with the same passion she hated him: fiercely, violently, destructively. Their home was a battlefield of emotions. One day she'd smother him with affection. The next she'd call him a lame brat, mocking his deformity, a twisted foot that would haunt him forever. The boy learned early what shame felt like. Every limp reminded him he wasn't normal, that beauty and perfection were for others. He became obsessed with mirrors, not to admire himself, but to control the reflection, to turn his weakness into something powerful. He looked at his limp foot, at the sneer on his mother's face, and swore that one day the world would kneel before him. Pain was the fuel that would ignite his genius. What no one realized was that, beneath the noble title he inherited after his great-uncle's death, the 6th Baron Byron of Rochdale, lay a boy starving for validation, desperate to be loved yet destined to destroy anyone who tried. The estate he inherited, Newstead Abbey, should have been a symbol of status, a grand home filled with luxury. Instead, it was falling apart, cold, empty, decaying, like its new master. His mother couldn't afford repairs, so they rented it out while moving from place to place. Every move fed Byron's growing restlessness. He was clever, charming, and beautiful, but broken. At school, his temper was quick, his pride sharper than any sword. He fought, he mocked, he seduced, so even as a child. When other boys played games, Byron played people. The world was his stage, and he learned early how to perform pain in ways that made others want to save him. At just 7 years old, he fell deeply, obsessively in love with his cousin, Mary Duff. It was an innocent affection that quickly turned into something darker. When he heard she was married, he didn't cry. He collapsed. His mother watched in horror as her young son shook with grief, as if his heart had been shattered beyond repair. That was the first time Byron realized how powerful love could be, not in joy, but in suffering. He learned that heartbreak drew attention, and attention meant control. That lesson would stay with him forever. As he grew older, the contradictions inside him multiplied. At school, he began forming passionate attachments with both boys and girls. His beauty made people gravitate toward him, and his loneliness made him pull them in even closer. These weren't just friendships, they were emotional storms, full of longing, jealousy, and manipulation. Byron craved intensity, and when he couldn't find it, he created it. Behind every laugh was pain, behind every kiss was fear, and behind every poem, a confession. The poet was already being born, but he didn't write for love or fame. He wrote to survive himself. By the time Byron reached Trinity College, Cambridge, he was already a legend in the making. Wild, magnetic, and uncontrollable. He drank heavily, spent recklessly, and surrounded himself with lovers and enemies alike. His deformity made him insecure, but his arrogance made him untouchable. He masked his fragility with wit, his fear with sarcasm, his self-hatred with performance. He became the master of illusion, a man who could make the world believe he was a god, while secretly crumbling like dust. Even his poetry began as rebellion. He wrote a collection called Fugitive Pieces, filled with raw passion, desire, and sin. When he showed it to his friend, Reverend J.T. Becker, the man was horrified. "Burn it," he said. "It'll ruin you." And Byron did. But as the flames consumed his first poems, something inside him ignited too, a hunger for danger. If the world wanted to silence him, he would make them listen. If they wanted a sinner, he would become one. He traveled through Europe, escaping creditors and scandal, feeding on adventure and lust. He wrote in the night, inspired by the people he met: soldiers, artists, lovers, strangers. When he returned to England, he turned those experiences into poetry that shook society to its core. His masterpiece, Childe Harold's Pilgrimage, told the story of a disillusioned wanderer, a young man tired of pleasure, haunted by emptiness. It wasn't just fiction, it was Byron himself. The public adored it. Women sent him letters drenched in perfume and tears. Men envied his fame, his fortune, his boldness. London had found its new god, and Byron had found his addiction: fame. But fame wasn't the cure. It was gasoline poured onto his wounds. With every cheer came more loneliness. With every fan came more temptation. The man who once limped in shame now walked through the grand halls of London like a king. Yet every step echoed with the same pain he'd carried since childhood. Lord Byron was not just a poet. He was a contradiction wrapped in velvet. A man whose beauty hid his deformity, whose genius hid his madness, and whose words seduced the world while his soul decayed in silence. The boy who had stared into the mirror as a child finally had the world's reflection staring back. And he loved it. But deep down, he knew that every echo of applause was just a reminder of how empty the sound of loneliness could be. Byron had conquered the world of words, but the demons that whispered to him in childhood hadn't left. They were waiting, patient, hungry, and ready to turn his newfound glory into the greatest downfall the literary world had ever seen. Because what comes after fame is the price you pay for it. Fame had made Lord Byron a legend, but it also made him a prisoner. The same crowd that once worshipped him now followed him everywhere, whispering, speculating, and craving his downfall. In the candlelit salons of London, women hid his poems beneath their pillows. Men mocked him behind their glasses of wine, and the church prayed for his soul to be damned. Byron was the most talked about man in Europe, not for his genius, but for his sins. He had everything: wealth, status, power, beauty. But to Byron, these things were toys. The real thrill came from breaking the rules that held others captive. He wasn't chasing fame anymore. He was chasing destruction. He would walk into a ballroom, flash that devilish smile, and ruin reputations with just one glance. Women couldn't resist him. Men couldn't understand him. And Byron? He couldn't stop himself. Among the many who fell under his spell was Lady Caroline Lamb, a married woman of high status. She called him mad, bad, and dangerous to know, words that would define his entire legacy. Their affair was volcanic, passionate one moment, poisonous the next. They met in secret, wrote letters that burned with desire, and fought like enemies in love. When Byron grew bored and ended it, Lady Caroline didn't forgive. She turned her heartbreak into vengeance, exposing him publicly through novels and letters. Suddenly, Byron wasn't just a poet, he was a scandal. The London elite that once adored him began to recoil, but Byron didn't hide. He leaned into the chaos. Every insult became inspiration. Every rumor became a challenge. He published The Giaour and The Bride of Abydos, dark romantic poems about love, sin, and vengeance. Critics attacked him, but readers devoured his words like forbidden fruit. Byron's heroes were reflections of himself, beautiful, broken, dangerous men who loved too deeply and destroyed everything they touched. But behind the fame, the man was crumbling. His debts grew, his temper worsened, and his loneliness became unbearable. He turned his pain into seduction, moving from one lover to another, actresses, aristocrats, even servants. Yet none could fill the void. He wanted to be loved completely, yet feared being known truly. Because to know him was to see the madness he tried so hard to hide. Then came Annabella Milbank, a woman as intelligent as she was innocent. She believed she could save him, tame the fire that burned inside. In 1815 they married, and for a moment it seemed Byron might change. But darkness doesn't vanish with a wedding ring, it deepens. Their marriage quickly descended into chaos, shouting, jealousy, manipulation, and mental torment. Byron's moods swung like a pendulum between tenderness and cruelty. He mocked her intelligence, accused her of betrayal, and filled their home with dread. Within a year, she fled, taking their newborn daughter, Ada, with her. And then came the whispers. Whispers that Byron had committed unspeakable acts, that his relationships with men were more than friendship, that his love for his half-sister Augusta went beyond the lines of morality. The scandal exploded like wildfire. Newspapers branded him a monster, a sinner, a disgrace to the nobility. Churches refused to read his work. London, the city that once adored him, now spat out his name. The poet who had conquered England was now an exile. In 1816, he fled his homeland, never to return. The journey across Europe was both an escape and a funeral. The death of Lord Byron, the celebrity, and the birth of Byron, the myth. He traveled through France, Switzerland, Italy, leaving behind a trail of lovers and legends. It was in Switzerland that he met Percy Bysshe Shelley and Mary Godwin, the creators of Frankenstein. Their nights were filled with storms, wine, and horror stories. It was there that Byron's darkness found new life, not through fame, but through philosophy. He became obsessed with death, not just as a concept, but as a companion. He spoke often of how he could feel it following him, whispering in the silence between his words. In letters, he wrote about the beauty of decay, the poetry of pain, and the peace of oblivion. "If I die tomorrow," he once wrote, "let the world know I loved too deeply and suffered for it." But Byron wasn't ready to die yet. He turned his exile into a stage. In Italy, he lived like a king in ruin, surrounded by mistresses, revolutionaries, and artists. He joined secret political groups, funded uprisings, and became a symbol of rebellion. He saw in revolution what he saw in love, a reflection of his own chaos. His poetry grew darker, more powerful. Works like Manfred and Don Juan tore open his soul for the world to see. Manfred was a confession disguised as a play, a man haunted by guilt and forbidden desire, begging the spirits for forgiveness, but finding none. Readers loved it. Critics called it madness. Byron didn't care. For the first time, his pain had become art, pure, raw, and eternal. Yet behind the ink, he was still bleeding. He drank endlessly, slept restlessly, and wrote feverishly. His letters were full of sarcasm, but his eyes told the truth. He was tired. He once said, "I only go on because I can't stop. There's nothing left to lose." In public, he was defiant, attending masquerade balls, laughing with courtesans, throwing coins to beggars as if mocking fate itself. But alone, he would sit in silence for hours, staring into candlelight as though waiting for someone or something to appear. He once told a friend, "I don't fear death. I fear being forgotten." That fear drove him to his final act of rebellion, one that would define his legacy forever. In 1823, when the Greek War of Independence broke out, Byron saw his last chance to live a life worthy of his poetry. He sold his possessions, raised money for the Greek army, and sailed across the sea. Not as a nobleman, not as a poet, but as a fighter. He wrote in his journal, "If I can't be a hero in words, let me be one in blood." The same man who once wrote of love now wrote of liberty. The same hands that penned verses now held a sword. But the war didn't bring glory. It brought sickness. Fever struck him, and his body, worn by years of excess, couldn't fight back. He died in 1824 in a small room in Missolonghi, Greece, at only 36. When the news reached Europe, the world mourned, not the scandalous man, but the myth he had become. The Greeks called him a hero. England pretended to forget his sins, but history didn't. Because Byron was never meant to be pure. He was meant to be a mirror, reflecting the beauty and horror that live inside all of us. He once wrote, "The great object of life is sensation, to feel that we exist, even though in pain." And that's exactly what he did. He lived not to be happy, but to burn, brighter, wilder, and shorter than anyone else. When Lord Byron's heart stopped beating in that dim, rain-soaked room in Greece, the world thought his story had ended. But for Byron, death wasn't the end. It was his final poem. His body was returned to England. But even in death, the British elite refused to forgive him. The Westminster Abbey, the resting place of kings, poets, and heroes, rejected his remains. Too scandalous, they said. Too sinful. So the man who once ruled London's salons was buried quietly in a small churchyard in Nottinghamshire, away from the marble halls that could not bear his shadow. But Byron didn't need a monument. He had already carved one, in ink and infamy. His words became his tombstone and his legend, his revenge. For decades, people whispered about him, the poet who loved too wildly, sinned too deeply, and wrote too beautifully to ever die. In life, Byron burned every bridge. In death, he became the bridge between eras, between the romantic and the modern, between human frailty and immortal art. His poetry inspired generations of writers, from Oscar Wilde to Tennyson, from Shelley to even modern icons of rebellion and counterculture. Wherever a soul refused to obey, Byron's spirit lived on. But his most haunting legacy wasn't in his words. It was in his blood. His daughter, Ada Lovelace, whom he barely knew, would grow up to become something extraordinary. Where Byron used words, Ada used numbers. She became the world's first computer programmer, writing algorithms for Charles Babbage's analytical engine. In a poetic twist of fate, the daughter of chaos became the mother of order, the first spark of the digital age born from the ashes of a poet's madness. Historians often say that Byron gave the world art, but through Ada, he gave it technology. Every smartphone, every algorithm, every AI whisper we hear today, all trace back in some strange way to the same fire that once burned inside a tormented poet's heart. The darkness he carried didn't end him. It evolved. Even his scandals refused to die. Centuries later, people still debate his forbidden relationships, his rumored affairs with men and his half-sister, and his volatile mind. Some call him a sinner, others a revolutionary. But all agree, he was a mirror of the human condition. Because Byron didn't hide from his demons, he wrote them into existence. He forced the world to look at what it wanted to ignore: passion, shame, madness, beauty, destruction. He made it clear that to live fully, one must first be willing to fall completely. In one of his final notes, Byron wrote, "I have drunk deep of all things, and the cup of life is bitter." He knew what was coming. The fever that killed him wasn't just in his body, it was in his soul. He was tired of being a myth, tired of being watched, loved, hated, analyzed. The same fame that made him immortal had also killed him. Yet there's an eerie comfort in knowing that even as his body weakened, his pen never stopped. He died writing, a poet to the very end. His funeral was private, but his legend was not. Across Europe, people dressed in black to mourn him. His poems sold out overnight. Painters captured his image, the dark curls, the brooding eyes, the expression that seemed both proud and haunted. And soon Byron became more than a man. He became a symbol. To artists, he was freedom. To lovers, he was temptation. To the church, he was a warning. To the world, he was a reminder that beauty and sin often wear the same face. As the decades passed, the Byronic hero became a timeless archetype, the handsome, tormented rebel who walks between good and evil. You see him in modern literature, in movies, in songs, from Heathcliff to James Dean, from Batman to Dracula. They all carry a trace of Byron's ghost, that mix of arrogance and sorrow, charm and damnation, the eternal rebel who feels too much and fits nowhere. But beyond the myth, there was still a man, A man who wanted love, peace, and redemption, but could only find them in the flames of his own destruction. And maybe that's why we can't stop talking about him. Because Byron wasn't a story about a poet. He was a story about us. About every human being who's ever felt trapped between light and shadow. The darkness he lived in wasn't evil. It was real. The same darkness that drives ambition, that fuels art, that makes us question who we really are. And maybe that's why his name still echoes 2 centuries later. In every verse of pain, in every whispered confession, in every broken heart that tries to make something beautiful out of suffering, Byron lives. He didn't want forgiveness. He wanted truth. And he found it the only way he knew how, through chaos. When you read his words today, you don't just see a poet, you see a man at war with himself, daring you to face your own shadow. That's the reason his story still feels alive, because it is. The world changes, but the human heart doesn't. We still crave what he craved, passion, meaning, and freedom from the cages we build around ourselves. Byron once wrote, "There is pleasure in the pathless woods. There is rapture on the lonely shore." Maybe he was never running from society. Maybe he was running back to something purer, something that existed before fame, before sin, before judgment. And perhaps that's the truth we were never meant to see. That his darkness wasn't a curse, it was his gift. A reminder that light means nothing without shadow, and that even the most broken souls can change the world. So next time you hear the name Lord Byron, don't just think of scandal or poetry. Think of fire. Think of the man who showed us that beauty doesn't always wear purity. Sometimes it wears scars. Because in the end, Byron didn't just write about darkness. He became it. And through that darkness, he achieved immortality. If you're fascinated by how power, passion, and madness shaped history's most dangerous minds, then this is just the beginning. Subscribe to Pastify Hub, where every story uncovers the hidden truth behind wealth, power, and the dark side of human ambition. Because history is far darker than you've ever been told.